Alright, today we pick up with education and pop culture. Like I said in the last video that kids were now able to go to school more because mom and dad were both working, or at least cost of living was going to make it more capable for them to go get an education. So that's going to change schools in the 1920s and what's happening. So enrollment for high school is going to increase by 4 times between 1914 and 1926. And like I said, the reason why is because of the prosperous times, but also a lot of jobs were now requiring more higher education, and that included high school. So that's going to affect schools with the number of kids coming in, but it's also going to affect schools with what they're going to be teaching. So we'll see some changes in course offerings. Before 1920, high school was kind of a college prep in order to get you ready for high school. After 1920, it's going to include a lot more things, a broad range of topics, including things like vocational things like technology and shop and those kinds of stuff, as well as home ec courses in order to broaden your atmosphere. There's some challenges that are going to come with this, though, because a lot of teachers were now teaching new immigrant children, and many of them do not speak English, and so they were not equipped for that. They weren't trained for that, and so that does create some difficulties. Plus, you have a lot of kids coming in with different backgrounds of what they had as prior knowledge, so it does make for some interesting challenges for teachers in this time period. Mass media is going to highly affect popular culture during this time. Newspapers are going to try and hook their readers by imitating tabloids, being more sensationalistic, trying to get your attention, and so they kind of exaggerate some details, and so the 1920s is really not known for its really great reporting in newspapers. Magazines are going to be another major part of mass media, and they are going to help summarize the week's news, both foreign and domestic, of what's going on in the world. But radio is really going to come to the forefront as the most powerful form of communication in the U.S. The nice thing about radio is you could hear the news as it happened, and you could listen to the president, or you could listen to the World Series game. And so it really brings the U.S. closer together as a country, where you could be up to date on what was going on around the world. Through the pop culture and all the stuff that's being promoted by mass media, we do see a lot of heroes develop. And a lot of that's because people during this time period have more money, they have more leisure time, so they're doing things like dance marathons, and they're idolizing sports stars, they're doing crossword puzzles, all kinds of leisure time activities. And so, like I said, they're starting to idolize these sports heroes. And these sports heroes, as they start emerging, they really restore the belief in the American dream, that anyone can succeed no matter who you are and what kind of background you have. If you have a talent in an area, you could be very, very successful. You could make something of yourself. So, for example, you had Babe Ruth, who played for the New York Yankees. And in 1927, he hits a record 60 home runs, which is going to be an unbroken record for a long time. It isn't broken until the 2000s. The Negro National League, is going to be a big part of the 1920s as well. So you had the Baseball League, but then you also had the Negro National League. It will decline after the color barrier is broken, but it was a major, especially in the southern states, a major part of their lifestyle. Jack Dempsey is going to be known as the boxing heavyweight champion, and he really makes boxing a legitimate sport rather than just two guys punching the heck out of each other. He is going to show that it actually does take a lot of technique, and it takes a lot of training. College football is going to be boosted by Red Grange, who was a University of Illinois running back, and Notre Dame is going to have 5 undefeated seasons in the 1920s, and that's going to really boost interest in college football. Tennis and golf are also going to see a lot of increase in people doing this activity. Gertrude Ederle is going to be the first woman to swim across the English Channel, which is a huge feat for the time. People are following what people are doing in these amazing feats. And so she swims across the English Channel, which, if you know anything about the English Channel, it's cold, it's rather choppy water, it's not exactly easy to get across, so it was a huge thing. We see heroes emerge not only in sports but also in other aspects of life as well. Charles Lindbergh will fly the first non-stop solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. He did so in his plane called the Spirit of St. Louis, and he flew from New York City to Paris. And he is going to symbolize the American dream, that he was honest and brave and hardworking, and you know, he had a goal and he set out to do it, and he did it. So that's kind of an inspiration. It's an inspiration for others, especially people like Amelia Earhart, who are going to make their own name for themselves based on that inspiration. Movies in Hollywood will also provide heroes. Filmmaking was actually the fourth largest American industry in the U.S. in the 1920s. So Hollywood is going to be established as the American movie capital in the 1920s, and they were producing silent films throughout the 1920s and before the 1920s. And those silent films produced stars like Charlie Chaplin, who was known as the Little Tramp with his little mustache, Clara Bow, who was known as the It Girl. Basically, they didn't know what she had, but whatever she had, it was it kind of thing, that she just had that special quality. Rudolph Valentino, who was sort of like the Brad Pitt of his time. He was a dark, seductive actor, like everybody wanted to be with him. So he was well known for his role in the movie called The Sheik, and so he played an Arabian sheik and was all like, girls were gaga over him kind of thing. Then in 1927, things change. The Jazz Singer is going to be produced, and it's the first film with sound. It doesn't have a lot of sound, but it's the first talking film, and it kind of throws Hollywood for a loop. Then in 1928, Steamboat Willie will be the first sound movie starring Mickey Mouse. So that's where Disney gets their start. And attendance is going to double with the talking films. And so now everyone in Hollywood wants to produce a talking film. Theater and music and art will also be influenced throughout the 1920s. In theater, before the 1920s, American theater basically just imitated what Europe was doing, because that's all we knew how to do. We didn't really develop our own individual style. Eugene O'Neill will be the first American playwright to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. And his plays are going to focus on isolation and confusion and family conflict. Those are all things that happened within that urban lifestyle where you really don't know your neighbors, and there's competition and everybody's judged based on their accomplishments. So he really plays up that idea. Music is also going to break away from European traditions, and we start developing our own. George Gershwin is going to combine American jazz with other traditional forms of music to create his own special blend of music that he produces. Aaron Copland is going to produce music that combined the folk songs of American rural areas with other forms of traditional music. And if you think back to the old like beef commercials, the dun 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 dun, so that's Aaron Copland music, and he's combining, like I said, those old folk songy kind of things with the more modern music. Art is going to begin to sort of portray the dreams and the realities of the 1920s. Ed Hopper is an artist, American artist, and he is going to really paint the loneliness of American life. It's a very honest look at everyday realities. It's called the Ashcan style. It's kind of an in-your-face, things are not as good as what you keep saying they are sort of approach. And then you had Georgia O'Keeffe, who is going to kind of go the opposite way, that making things even better than what they were. She does a lot of landscapes of New York City and showing just the grandeur and how big it is and how colorful and overwhelming at times it can be. Writers also are going to make some major changes in the 1920s in the U.S. They often criticize the small town life and the shallowness or even the vulgarity of the American business culture, of how they just didn't care about things. So there's several writers. Sinclair Lewis will be the first American writer to win a Nobel Prize in Literature. And he is going to criticize the middle class. He writes a couple of books, Babbitt and Main Street, and they're both very critical of like small town life and the politics of that and kind of the doldrums kind of thing. H.L. Mencken is a journalist, and he writes a lot of newspaper articles, and he is going to criticize pretty much anything. And he criticizes the church, he criticizes public schools, he criticizes politicians, the middle class. Basically, he just points out the major flaws in all of these things. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who writes The Great Gatsby, is going to reveal the negative side to freedom and fun. Like it's great to have freedom and fun, but there's also some negative things that can happen. Like you lose friends, or you can lose money, or you could lose your life, all kinds of stuff that if you're not careful and watch what you're doing. Willa Cather is going to write about the lives of immigrant farmers in a rural setting. So she's a little different from the others, but she writes about immigrant farmers in Nebraska. She shows sort of the simplicity and dignity of these immigrants and what they're dealing with, and she kind of shows it in a good light, so she's not quite as negative as some of the others. Many of these writers are going to leave the U.S. for Europe. Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, Fitzgerald, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, they will be leaving the U.S. and going to Europe because they are that dissatisfied with what's going on in the U.S. Many are in Europe during the war even, and as they remain there, they will denounce the war because they see it firsthand. And so you'll have like Hemingway, who's going to write several books about World War I. He writes The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms. And these are very tough books. It's like kind of like a tough love sort of thing, very simplified way of writing. He doesn't waste any words. He basically tells it how it is, and that, you know, war is stupid and people shouldn't be going to war and all kinds of stuff. So we see some major movements happening, and one of those major movements is going to be the Harlem Renaissance, which we'll talk about in our next video.